The morning I installed my heated concrete apron. I had no idea it would nearly cost me everything I owned and throw me into a legal nightmare that would consume the next 6 months of my life. I stood in my driveway in Parker, Colorado, watching the installation crew smooth out the final section of the heated concrete apron that connected my garage to the street. The October air was crisp, and I was already imagining how much easier my winters would be without having to shovel snow or worry about ice buildup. The system used radiant heating tubes embedded in the concrete, similar to what ski resorts used on their outdoor stairs and walkways. I had done my research, hired a licensed contractor, and pulled all the necessary permits from the town. Everything was by the book. My name is Peter Walsh, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates development for 3 years. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions where every house looked vaguely similar, painted in approved earth tones, with perfectly manicured lawns and trees that were all planted at the same time. I was a mechanical engineer at a local aerospace firm, and the heated apron was exactly the kind of practical solution I loved. It cost me nearly $15,000, but I figured it would pay for itself in convenience and safety over the years. The crew finished up around noon, and I signed off on the work. The lead contractor, a weathered man named Miguel, shook my hand and told me to wait 72 hours before turning on the heating system to let the concrete cure properly. I thanked him and went inside to make lunch, feeling pretty satisfied with myself. That feeling lasted exactly 48 hours. On Wednesday afternoon, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. I saved my CAD drawing and went to answer it, expecting a package delivery. Instead, I found myself face to face with a woman I recognized from neighborhood gatherings, but had never actually spoken to. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde highlights in her hair, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she took herself very seriously. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Peter Walsh," she asked, though she clearly already knew who I was. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Barbara Winters, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I need to speak with you about the unauthorized construction you have completed on your property." My stomach dropped a little. The heated apron. I pulled permits for that. Everything is legal. She made a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Having town permits does not exempt you from HOA approval, Mr. Walsh. According to our covenants, any exterior modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which you did not obtain." I felt my jaw tighten. I reviewed the covenants when I bought the house. There was nothing in there about driveways or aprons. "Section 12, subsection D," she said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "Any alteration to the exterior appearance or structure of properties must receive prior approval. Your heated apron extends beyond your property line onto the community easement, and the visible piping and control box on your garage wall are aesthetic violations. The control box is tiny and matches my siding, and the apron does not extend past my property line. I had it surveyed." Barbara's smile got even tighter. "I have photographs that suggest otherwise. Regardless, the HOA board reviewed your installation at our meeting last night, and we are requiring you to remove it and restore the area to its original condition. You have 30 days to comply, or we will begin fining you $200 per day." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "You want me to rip out $15,000 worth of work because I did not ask your permission first? That's insane." "Those are the rules everyone in this community agreed to when they purchased their homes. If we allowed everyone to just do whatever they wanted, property values would plummet." She pulled out a formal letter from her clipboard and handed it to me. "This is your official notice. If you have questions or wish to appeal, you can request a hearing with the board. The next meeting is in 3 weeks." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV before I could respond. I stood there holding the letter, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. That evening, I read through my HOA covenants again, this time with a lawyer's attention to detail. Barbara was technically correct that Section 12(d) required approval for exterior modifications, but the language was vague enough that I genuinely had not thought it applied to a driveway apron. The examples given in the covenant were things like room additions, pergolas, and fence installations. Nothing about driveways or concrete work. I called my real estate attorney, David Chen, the next morning and explained the situation. He listened patiently and then sighed. "HOAs can be tricky," he said. "They have a lot of latitude in interpreting their own rules, but if you pulled proper permits and the work is up to code, you have a strong argument that you acted in good faith. Request that hearing and bring all your documentation. Show them you did everything by the book except filing their form." I submitted my hearing request that same day, attaching copies of all my permits, contractor licenses, and the survey showing the apron was entirely on my property. Then I waited. 3 weeks felt like 3 months. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my new heated apron and felt a knot in my stomach. I had not even gotten to use the heating function yet because the concrete was still in its extended curing period. My contractor had recommended waiting a full month before the first use to ensure maximum strength and durability. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at 7 in the community center, a bland rectangular building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived 10 minutes early with a folder full of documents and a practice speech in my head. About 15 people were scattered around the room in folding chairs. I recognized some neighbors, but did not know most of them by name. Barbara sat at a table in the front with 4 other board members, 3 women and 1 man, all looking like they would rather be anywhere else. She called the meeting to order and worked through some routine business about landscaping contracts and budget approvals. Then she got to my case. Item 7. Appeal of violation notice by Peter Walsh regarding unauthorized heated concrete apron installation. Mr. Walsh, you have 10 minutes to present your case. I walked to the front and laid out my argument as clearly as I could. I explained that I had researched the covenants and believed in good faith that a driveway apron did not require HOA approval. I showed them my permits from the town, proving the work met all building codes. I presented the survey showing I had not encroached on any easements or property lines. I emphasized that the installation improved safety and functionality without negatively impacting anyone else or the neighborhood's appearance. When I finished, Barbara thanked me in a tone that suggested she had already made up her mind. Does anyone on the board have questions? A woman named Linda, who I think was the treasurer, raised her hand. Did you research whether you needed HOA approval before starting the work? I reviewed the covenants, I said, but I interpreted them as applying to structures and additions, not driveway modifications. My mistake was not asking for clarification, but it was an honest mistake. The covenant is quite clear, Barbara said. Exterior modifications require approval. We cannot make exceptions, or it opens the door for everyone to ignore the rules. But I am not asking you to ignore anything, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. I am asking you to approve what's already done. It is high-quality work that does not hurt anyone and actually adds value. The lone male board member, whose name I learned was Tom, spoke up. I actually think this seems reasonable. He followed all the legal requirements. Maybe we fine him for not submitting the request beforehand, but making him tear it out seems excessive." Barbara shot him a look. "We cannot set a precedent of allowing people to seek forgiveness instead of permission." "What is next?" "Someone builds a shed without approval and asks us to rubber stamp it." The discussion went back and forth for another 20 minutes. I could tell the board was split, with Barbara and 2 others firmly in the removal camp, and Tom and Linda more sympathetic to my position. Eventually, Barbara called for a vote, 3-2 in favor of upholding the violation and demanding removal. My heart sank. I tried one more argument. "If I remove this, I am going to have a destroyed driveway and be out $15,000 through no fault of my own. The work meets all safety and building standards. This is purely punitive." "You should have thought about that before proceeding without approval," Barbara said. "You have 30 days from the original notice date, which means 16 days remaining. This hearing is adjourned." I drove home feeling numb. 16 days to rip out a perfectly good heated apron and somehow restore my driveway, or face $200 per day in fines that would add up to $6,000 a month. The fines would eventually turn into liens against my property. I could potentially be forced to sell my house. That night, I could not sleep. I kept running scenarios in my head, trying to find a way out. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and started researching legal options. I found several cases where homeowners had successfully challenged HOA overreach in Colorado courts, but litigation was expensive and time-consuming. I also found horror stories of people who fought their HOAs and lost everything. At work the next day, I was useless. My mind kept drifting back to the problem. During lunch, my colleague Marcus asked if I was okay. I ended up telling him the whole story. "That is brutal, man," he said, "but I might know someone who can help. My brother-in-law is a concrete inspector for the county. He knows all the codes inside and out. Maybe he can find something that would force the HOA to back off." I took Marcus up on his offer, and that Friday I met with his brother-in-law, James Rivera, at a coffee shop in Parker. James was in his mid-30s, built like someone who spent their days on construction sites, with calloused hands and a no-nonsense demeanor. I explained the situation while he took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back and thought for a moment. "Heated concrete systems can be tricky," he said. "The thermal expansion and contraction cycles can cause cracking if the installation is not done right. Tell me about your system. What kind of heating elements and what temperature range?" I pulled up the specifications on my phone and showed him. He nodded as he read. "High output system. Makes sense for Colorado winters. But here is the thing. If your system is capable of heating the concrete significantly above ambient temperature, especially in cycles, you are creating thermal stress. Concrete expands when heated and contracts when cooled. Do that over and over, and you will develop cracks. Those cracks can compromise the structural integrity of the concrete. My contractor said this system was designed specifically for this application. Ski resorts use them." "They do, but ski resorts also have maintenance crews who monitor and repair cracks constantly. In a residential setting, thermal cracking in a driveway apron could actually violate building codes if it creates trip hazards or allows water infiltration that could damage the foundation or create ice buildup underneath. The building code requires concrete to maintain structural integrity and not create safety hazards." A weird feeling washed over me. "Are you saying my heated apron might actually be a code violation?" "Not necessarily, but it could become one if thermal cracking develops." "And if I were inspecting your property right now, Knowing what I know about high-output heating systems in concrete, I would flag it as a potential future violation and recommend either a lower output system or additional reinforcement to prevent cracking. I felt my world tilting. So the HOA might actually have a legitimate point, just not the one they think they are making, James shrugged. They are focused on their covenants, but from a building code perspective, yeah, there is a real concern here. If thermal cracks develop and create hazards, the town could cite you for code violations and require remediation anyway. I sat there staring into my coffee, trying to process this new information. The irony was almost funny. I had been so focused on fighting the HOA's procedural complaint that I had not even considered whether the installation itself might have technical problems. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "Get a proper engineering assessment. Have someone calculate the thermal stress loads and determine if the concrete is adequately reinforced. If it is not, you might need to remove it anyway, or at minimum add control joints and additional rebar. Either way, you need to know what you are dealing with." I thanked James and left the coffee shop feeling even worse than before. That evening, I called my contractor, Miguel, and explained what the concrete inspector had said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, I will be straight with you," Miguel said. "That system is designed for this kind of work, but yeah, thermal cracking is always a risk. We installed it to manufacturer specifications, and those specs meet code. But inspectors have discretion in how they interpret potential future issues. If your local inspector is concerned about thermal stress, they could flag it. Why did not you mention this before? Because it meets code as installed. The cracking concern is theoretical. It might never happen. But if you are in a fight with your HOA and they bring in their own inspector, they could use that argument against you." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. I spent the weekend researching thermal expansion in concrete, heating system specifications, and building codes. What I learned did not make me feel better. While my system technically met the installation code, the operational parameters could create stress that might lead to cracking over time. It was not a guarantee, but it was possible enough that an inspector looking for problems could find them. Monday morning, I had 11 days left before the fine started. I made a decision that felt like surrender but also like survival. I called Barbara Winters. "Mrs. Winters, this is Peter Walsh. I would like to discuss a potential resolution to the heated apron situation." Her tone was cool. "The board has made its decision, Mr. Walsh. You have 11 days to remove the apron." "I understand that, but I have learned some new information that I think the board should be aware of." I spoke with a concrete inspector, and there are legitimate concerns about thermal cracking that could violate building codes. I am not saying this to fight you. I am saying this because if I remove the apron now, it is going to be because of safety concerns, not just HOA rules. And I want to do it in a way that does not leave my driveway destroyed. There was silence on the other end. Then, "What exactly are you proposing? Give me 45 days instead of 11. That gives me time to hire an engineer to assess the installation, get proper documentation, and plan a removal and restoration that will not create more problems. In exchange, I will not fight the removal, and I will make sure whatever I install as a replacement has full HOA approval in advance." Another pause. "I will present this to the board, but I cannot make promises." 2 days later, I received an email from Barbara. The board had voted to extend my deadline to 45 days on the condition that I provide them with a written plan for removal and restoration within 2 weeks, and that I would not contest any fines if I missed the new deadline. It was not a great deal, but it was workable. I hired a structural engineer named Patricia Morris to assess the heated apron. She came out the following Monday with thermal imaging equipment and took detailed measurements of the installation. 3 days later, she sent me a report that was both relieving and damning. The installation itself was done correctly and met code as installed. However, her thermal modeling showed that operating the system at full capacity during extreme cold could create differential temperatures across the concrete of up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature differential would generate significant thermal stress. While the concrete might handle it for a few years, the repeated expansion and contraction cycles would likely create cracking within 5 to 7 years. Those cracks would start small, but could propagate into structural issues that would require full replacement anyway. Her recommendation was clear. Either replace the high-output heating system with a lower-output version that maintained smaller temperature differentials, or remove the system entirely. Operating it as installed would almost certainly lead to code violations down the road. I sat at my kitchen table reading her report, feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at my contractor for not explaining these risks more clearly. Frustration with the HOA for forcing the issue. But also a grudging realization that removing the system was probably the right call, even if Barbara Winters happened to be pushing for it for all the wrong reasons. I called Miguel and told him about the engineer's findings. To his credit, he did not argue or make excuses. If that is what the engineer says, I believe her. Look, I will remove the system at cost. No labor charges, just materials and disposal. It is going to run about $4,000 to demo it and pour a standard apron. I will eat the rest. It was not ideal, but it was something. I wrote up a formal plan describing the removal process, timeline, and restoration approach, and submitted it to the HOA. Barbara acknowledged receipt with a terse email saying the board found it acceptable. The demo started on a cold Wednesday morning in November. Miguel's crew showed up with a concrete saw and a small excavator. The noise was horrendous. Neighbors came out to watch the destruction of something that had just been installed a month earlier. I felt embarrassed and angry and defeated all at once. The removal took 2 full days. They cut the heated apron into sections, pulled out all the heating tubes and control systems, and hauled away the debris. Then they prepared the base and poured a new standard concrete apron. It looked almost identical to what had been there before, except now it cost me $4,000 and would do nothing to help me in winter. As I watched the crew smooth out the fresh concrete, I noticed Barbara Winters walking down the sidewalk toward my house. My jaw tightened. If she was coming to gloat, I was going to have a hard time staying civil, but her expression was not triumphant. She actually looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Walsh, I wanted to speak with you. If you are here to make sure I am complying, you can see for yourself." "No, that is not why I am here." She glanced at the crew working, then back at me. "I spoke with the town building inspector yesterday. He mentioned that he had concerns about thermal cracking in heated concrete systems, and that he was planning to review installations throughout the county. He said your case might have prevented a larger problem." I stared at her. "Are you actually saying I did something good by having to rip this out?" "I am saying that the HOA rules exist for reasons, even if they are not always obvious. We have had problems in the past with homeowners doing work that seemed fine initially but created issues later. Your case reminded me why we have approval processes. You could have just required me to get an engineering assessment instead of demanding immediate removal. You could have worked with me instead of threatening fines." Her face hardened. "We enforce the rules equally for everyone. If I had let you skip the approval process, every homeowner would expect the same treatment. You put me in an impossible position. You put yourself in that position by being inflexible. There is a difference between enforcing rules and being needlessly rigid. She started to respond, then stopped herself. After a moment, she said, "I hope your new apron serves you well," and walked away. The concrete cured over the next week. I paid Miguel his $4,000 and thanked him for at least making the removal less financially devastating than it could have been. My total loss was around $11,000 when all was said and done. A very expensive lesson in HOA politics and concrete engineering. But the story did not end there. 2 weeks after my new apron was finished, I was at home when I got a call from my neighbor, Gary, who lived 3 houses down. "Hey, Peter, I just got a violation notice from the HOA about my deck. They are saying I need to remove it because I never got approval. But I built that deck 5 years ago when I first moved in. I definitely remember filing the paperwork." A warning bell went off in my head. "Did you keep copies of the approval?" I thought I did, but I cannot find them. I am going through old files now, but Barbara is saying they have no record of any submission from me. This is crazy. I told Gary I would help however I could and started thinking. One missing approval form could be a paperwork error. But it seemed suspicious that the HOA would suddenly claim they had no record of something from 5 years ago. Over the next few days, I heard from 2 more neighbors with similar stories. Julie, who had installed a pergola 3 years earlier, and Marcus, my coworker, whose sister lived in the same neighborhood and had replaced her fence 18 months ago. All of them were now being told they needed to remove their work because the HOA had no record of approval. I called David Chen, my attorney, and explained what was happening. "That is a pattern," he said immediately. "1 missing form is an accident. 4 is either incompetence or something worse. Do any of these homeowners have copies of their approvals?" Gary says he cannot find his, but the others are looking. What could be going on? Worst case, someone on the HOA board is destroying records to generate violations and fines. Best case, their record keeping is so bad that they are falsely accusing people. Either way, it is a problem. Tell your neighbors to check their bank records for any checks or payments made to the HOA for application fees. That would prove they submitted the forms. I spread the word, and people started digging. Julie found a canceled check from 3 years ago for a $50 architectural review fee. Marcus's sister found an email confirmation from the HOA acknowledging receipt of her fence application. Gary found a receipt for his deck application payment. All of them had proof they had submitted applications. None of them had received denials. But now the HOA was claiming no record of any of it existed. I organized a meeting at my house with all the affected homeowners. 8 people showed up, all with similar stories of suddenly being told that work they had done months or years earlier was unapproved and needed to be removed or face fines. "This has to be illegal," Julie said. "They cannot just claim records do not exist when we have proof we submitted them." "It might be fraud," David Chen said. I had invited him to join us as a consultant. "If someone is deliberately destroying records to generate violations, that is potentially criminal fraud. At minimum, it is a breach of fiduciary duty by the HOA board." "What do we do?" Gary asked. "We demand access to the HOA records," David said. "Under Colorado law, homeowners have the right to inspect HOA documents, including architectural review applications. If the HOA refuses, we can force it through court. And if we find evidence that records were destroyed, we report it to the authorities." I volunteered to draft the formal records request. That night, I put together a detailed letter citing Colorado Revised Statutes Section 3833.3317, which gave homeowners the right to examine HOA records. I demanded access to all architectural review applications and approvals from the past 7 years, along with financial records showing application fee payments. I submitted the request to Barbara Winters via certified mail the next morning. Under the law, the HOA had 10 business days to respond. 8 days later, I received a letter from an attorney named Gregory Hampton, representing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The letter stated that my records request was overly broad and burdensome, and that the HOA would only provide records directly related to my own property. Access to other homeowners' applications would violate privacy and was denied. David Chen read the letter and shook his head. That is not how the law works. If the other homeowners authorize you to review their records, the HOA cannot claim privacy. This is stall tactics. We had all 8 affected homeowners sign authorization forms, allowing me to review their architectural submissions on their behalf. I sent those to Gregory Hampton along with a response stating that the privacy objection was now moot, and the HOA was legally required to produce the records. Another week went by with no response. Then I received a call from Barbara Winters. Her tone was different this time, less authoritative and more defensive. "Mr. Walsh, I want to resolve this records issue without involving attorneys. It has gotten out of hand." "You involved attorneys first," I said. "All we are asking for is what we are legally entitled to. If you have the records, produce them. If you do not have them, admit it. The situation is complicated. We had a change in management companies 2 years ago, and some records were not properly transferred. We are still trying to locate missing files. So you are admitting you do not have the records. I am saying we are looking for them. But demanding access to years of files with 10 days' notice is unreasonable. These things take time. The law says 10 days. You have had 18. Either provide the records or face legal action." She hung up on me. I immediately called David and told him what she had said. "A change in management companies is not an excuse for violating the statute," he said. "File a complaint with the district court. We will force this into the open." We filed the complaint the next day. In Colorado, homeowners can petition the court to compel HOA compliance with records requests. It is not a full lawsuit, more like a motion to enforce statutory rights. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. During those 3 weeks, strange things started happening. I received a new violation notice from the HOA claiming that my mailbox was not up to code. It had been fine for 3 years, but suddenly it was a problem. Gary got a notice about his lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall. Julie was cited for having decorative stones in her garden that were not on the approved materials list. It was obvious retaliation, but it was also clumsy enough to be documented. I took photos, saved all the notices, and added them to our court filings as evidence of HOA harassment. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in Douglas County District Court. Judge Maria Cordova presided. She was in her 50s, with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from either side. David Chen presented our case, laying out the timeline of records requests, the HOA's refusal to comply, and the pattern of violations against homeowners who had questioned the board. He submitted all our documentation showing proof of submitted applications, payment receipts, and email confirmations. Gregory Hampton, representing the HOA, argued that the records were being compiled and that our request was premature. He claimed the management company transition had created unavoidable complications and asked for more time. Judge Cordova was not impressed. "Counsel, the statute gives 10 business days for a reason. It has been over a month. Why have the records not been produced?" "Your Honor, we are dealing with thousands of pages of documents going back 7 years. The petitioners are not asking for every document. They are asking for specific architectural review files for 8 properties. That should not take a month to locate, even with a management transition." Hampton tried a different angle. "Your Honor, even if we locate the files, there is a question about whether the petitioner has standing to request records for other homeowners' properties. Counsel, did you read the authorizations attached to the petition? Each affected homeowner has specifically authorized Mr. Walsh to review their files. What is the HOA trying to hide here?" That question hung in the air. Hampton fumbled for a response, but did not have a good one. Judge Cordova made her ruling. The HOA is ordered to produce all requested records within 7 days. If the records cannot be located, the HOA must provide a sworn affidavit from the board president explaining what happened to them and what efforts were made to locate them. Failure to comply will result in sanctions and attorney fees. This hearing is adjourned. We left the courthouse feeling vindicated. Barbara Winters had been sitting in the gallery during the hearing, and she looked furious. 5 days later, I received a box of documents via courier. It contained architectural review files for 6 of the 8 properties in question. The other 2 files, including Gary's deck application, were missing. But attached was a letter from Barbara Winters stating that an internal investigation had revealed improper document disposal by a former board member named Catherine Morrison. According to the letter, Catherine had served as secretary until 6 months ago, when she resigned due to personal issues. During her tenure, she had apparently destroyed numerous architectural review applications without board knowledge or approval. The letter claimed that the board had only recently discovered this and was taking steps to prevent future occurrences. It smelled like a cover story to me. I called David immediately. "This Catherine person is their scapegoat," he said. "Even if she did destroy records, the board has liability for failing to supervise her, and I would bet money that Barbara Winters knew what was happening." "What can we do about it?" we reported to law enforcement. "If records were destroyed to generate fraudulent fines, that is criminal." I contacted the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and filed a report explaining the situation. A detective named Sarah Brennan was assigned to the case. She was in her early 40s, thorough and skeptical in equal measure. Detective Brennan interviewed all the affected homeowners, reviewed our documentation, and then interviewed Barbara Winters and the other board members. She also tracked down Catherine Morrison, the former secretary. 2 weeks later, Detective Brennan called me with an update. Catherine Morrison admits she destroyed some records, but she says Barbara Winters instructed her to do it. She says Winters told her to get rid of applications that were incomplete or never approved, so they could cite the homeowners later for violations. Morrison claims she objected but went along because she was afraid of being kicked off the board. My blood ran cold. So it was deliberate fraud, it might be, but Morrison is not exactly a reliable witness. She has her own legal problems now and might be pointing fingers to save herself. We need more evidence. I am going to subpoena the HOA's financial records to see if there is a pattern of fines being assessed after records were destroyed. The investigation stretched on for weeks. Winter arrived, and I found myself shoveling my driveway by hand, thinking about the heated apron that could have been. The irony was not lost on me. In January, Detective Brennan got a warrant to seize the HOA's computers and financial records. What she found was damning. Over the past 2 years, the HOA had assessed over $100,000 in fines against homeowners in the neighborhood. A significant portion of those fines were for violations related to missing architectural approvals. More importantly, the computer forensics showed that dozens of application files had been deleted from the HOA's digital records system, and the deletions coincided with Barbara Winters' login credentials. Catherine Morrison had destroyed some paper records, but Winters had systematically deleted digital files. The motive became clear when they looked at the HOA's finances. Barbara Winters had been embezzling funds from the association for over 3 years, using a scheme where she created fake vendor invoices for services that were never performed. The fraud totaled nearly $200,000. The fine money helped cover the shortfalls in the budget that her embezzlement created. In February, Barbara Winters was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, computer tampering, and forgery. Catherine Morrison was charged as an accessory. The local news covered the arrests, and suddenly our quiet suburban neighborhood was a minor scandal. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and suspended all outstanding violations and fines pending a complete review of records. They hired a forensic accountant and a new management company to clean up the mess. Homeowners who had paid fines over the past 2 years were offered refunds. I attended the emergency meeting, along with most of the neighborhood. People were angry, scared, and confused. Many had paid thousands of dollars in fines they could not afford. Some had even taken out loans or sold property to comply with removal orders. The remaining board members, Tom and Linda, looked shell-shocked. Tom spoke first. "On behalf of the board, I want to apologize. We failed in our oversight duties. We trusted Barbara to manage day-to-day operations, and we did not catch what she was doing until it was too late. We take full responsibility." "What happens now?" someone shouted from the audience. "We are going to make this right," Linda said. "Everyone who paid a fine based on a missing approval will be refunded. We are working with an attorney to potentially recover funds from Barbara's assets, and we are completely restructuring how the HOA operates to prevent this from ever happening again." After the meeting, Tom pulled me aside. "I want to personally apologize to you, Peter. Your heated apron situation started all of this unraveling. If you had just complied and not pushed back, we might never have discovered the fraud. You did the whole neighborhood a service." I did not feel like a hero. I felt tired and frustrated by the whole mess. I just wanted a heated driveway. For what it is worth, the engineer's report probably saved you from bigger problems down the road, but the way Barbara handled it was wrong from the start. If we had worked with you instead of threatening you, maybe all of this would have come out sooner. The criminal case against Barbara Winters moved through the courts over the following months. I was subpoenaed to testify at her preliminary hearing about the timeline of my own violations and the pattern of missing records. She glared at me from the defense table the entire time I was on the stand. Her attorney tried to argue that the record's destruction was a bookkeeping error, not fraud. But the computer forensics, combined with Catherine Morrison's testimony as a cooperating witness, painted a clear picture of intentional misconduct. In April, Barbara pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for agreeing to pay restitution and serve 18 months in jail. Catherine Morrison got probation and community service for her cooperation. Many in the neighborhood, including me, thought she got off too easy, but the prosecutor said her testimony was essential to securing Barbara's conviction. The HOA held elections for a new board in May. The turnout was unprecedented. People who had never paid attention to HOA politics suddenly cared deeply about oversight and accountability. A new president was elected, a retired accountant named Robert Chen, who promised transparency and reasonable enforcement of rules. One of Robert's first acts was to review all outstanding violations and dismiss anything that was not a clear safety or legal issue. He also implemented a new policy requiring board approval for any fine over $100 and requiring independent review of any removal orders. In June, I attended my first HOA meeting under the new board. It was a completely different atmosphere. Robert solicited input from homeowners, explained the reasoning behind decisions, and treated people with respect. It was what an HOA should have been all along. After the meeting, Robert approached me. "Peter, I wanted to run something by you. A few homeowners have asked about heated driveways and aprons. Given your experience, I thought you might have thoughts on how we should handle approval requests." I had to smile at the irony. Honestly, after everything I went through, I would say require an engineering assessment up front. If someone wants to install a heated system, make sure they get professional analysis of thermal stress and long-term durability. Approve systems that meet the engineering standards, reject ones that do not. Make it about safety and function, not arbitrary rules. That seems reasonable. Would you be willing to help draft a policy? I agreed, and over the summer, I worked with Robert and an engineer to create clear guidelines for heated concrete systems in the neighborhood. The policy required engineering review, proper permitting, and ongoing maintenance plans. It also limited the maximum operating temperature differentials to prevent the thermal cracking issues that had doomed my installation. In August, my neighbor 2 streets over, a guy named Chris, became the first person to install a heated apron under the new policy. His system was lower output than mine had been, with better reinforcement and control systems to manage thermal stress. I went over to check it out when it was finished. "Thanks for paving the way," Chris said. "No pun intended. If you had not fought this fight, none of us would be able to do this." "I did not really win," I said. "I still had to rip mine out." "Yeah, but you exposed a fraudster and fixed a broken system. That is a bigger win than a heated driveway." He was probably right, but standing there looking at his new heated apron, I still felt a pang of envy. I had been so close. As fall arrived and the weather cooled, I thought about reinstalling my own heated system under the new guidelines. I had the money saved up again, and this time I knew exactly what I was doing. But every time I seriously considered it, I remembered the stress and conflict of the previous year. The idea lost its appeal. Instead, I bought a good snowblower and made peace with the fact that some battles are not worth refighting, even when you could win the second time around. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though normal was different now. People paid more attention to HOA meetings. The board operated with more transparency, and there was a collective wariness about anyone trying to exercise authority without accountability. Barbara Winter's house went into foreclosure that fall. The restitution order required her to pay back a significant portion of what she had stolen, and her assets were liquidated to cover it. The house sold in November to a young couple with kids who had no idea about the neighborhood's recent drama. I introduced myself when they moved in and welcomed them to Meadowbrook Estates, deciding not to mention that the previous owner was in jail for embezzling from them. I saw Barbara Winters one more time, completely by accident, at a grocery store in Castle Rock the following spring. She had been released early for good behavior and was apparently living with relatives somewhere in the area. We made eye contact across the produce section. She looked older and smaller than I remembered. I nodded slightly, not in forgiveness but just in acknowledgement that we were both still here, both had to keep living our lives. She looked away quickly and left the store. That summer, nearly 2 years after I had first installed my heated apron, I was elected to the HOA board. I had never wanted to be involved in neighborhood politics, but people remembered how I had stood up to Barbara and exposed the fraud. They wanted someone on the board who would not be pushed around and would not abuse power. I served 1 term, helped continue the reforms Robert had started, and then gratefully handed the responsibility to someone else. Being on the board gave me a new appreciation for how difficult it is to manage a community where everyone has opinions and very little consensus. It also convinced me that I never wanted to do it again. My driveway apron, the standard non-heated version that replaced my thermal system, developed a small crack in its 3rd winter. Nothing structural, just a hairline fissure from normal freeze-thaw cycles. I filled it with concrete caulk and moved on with my life. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had just asked the HOA for approval before installing the heated system. Would Barbara have approved it? Probably not. Would I have fought her? Almost certainly. Would the fraud still have been exposed? Maybe eventually, but possibly not before more people were hurt. The whole experience taught me things I wish I did not need to know about HOAs, power, and the importance of questioning authority, even when it is easier not to. It cost me time, money, and peace of mind, but it also connected me with my neighbors in ways that would not have happened otherwise. We shared something, went through something together, and came out the other side different. On the practical side, I became something of a neighborhood expert on concrete and heating systems. People called me when they were planning projects, asking for advice on permits and HOA approvals. I helped several neighbors navigate the new architectural review process, making sure they dotted every I and crossed every T to avoid the nightmares I had experienced. The heated apron that started everything became a kind of legend in Meadowbrook Estates. New homeowners heard the story and either thought it was ridiculous that I had to remove it or understood it as a cautionary tale about reading the fine print. Either way, it gave me an identity in the neighborhood beyond just being the guy in the blue house. 3 years after the whole mess began, I was having a beer on my back patio with Gary and a few other neighbors who had been part of the fight against Barbara. We were laughing about something unrelated when Gary raised his glass to Peter and his heated apron. The most expensive driveway improvement that never got to improve anything. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. I joined in, finally able to find humor in the absurdity of it all. That heated apron had cost me around $11,000, 6 months of stress, and countless hours of research, meetings, and legal maneuvering. In return, I got a standard concrete apron that looked exactly like what I had started with, plus an unwanted education in HOA law and a minor role in exposing a major fraud. Was it worth it? I honestly still do not know, but it happened. I survived it and life went on. My driveway is fine. My house is fine. The neighborhood is better than it was. No thanks to me, but maybe slightly, because I refuse to just roll over when someone with a clipboard and an attitude decided to flex their authority. These days, when I pull into my driveway on a snowy winter morning and grab my shovel to clear the apron, I sometimes pause and imagine how nice it would be if the concrete heated itself. Then I finish shoveling, go inside and make myself coffee. Some problems have solutions. Others just have acceptance. Learning to tell the difference is probably the real lesson I took from the whole heated apron disaster. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA still exists, still enforces rules, and still requires approval for exterior modifications. But it does so with more oversight, more transparency, and more awareness that the rules serve the community, not the other way around. That change is worth more than any heated driveway, even if it is harder to appreciate on a cold January morning with a shovel in my hands. And if someone asked me whether they should install a heated apron in an HOA neighborhood, I would tell them my story and let them decide for themselves. Because ultimately, that is what living in a community is about. Making your own choices, accepting the consequences, and hoping that when conflicts arise, reason and fairness win out over power and ego. Sometimes they do, sometimes they do not, but you will never know unless you try.